Still good morning. We have very little time, about 40 minutes in all. And I have Professor Ashis Nandy with me. And those of you who don't know him should leave the room. I think he is our master iconoclast. And he has spawned many others who want to be like him but never quite make it. So many of us are copycats, but can we be a tiger like him? I don't think so. Well, all of us should buckle up because we're in for a roller coaster ride. After you listen to Ashis Nandy, you're both shaken and stirred. So with affection and admiration and a whole lot of envy, I present to you Professor Ashis Nandy.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yeah. It's okay. Huh? It's okay. Okay. Well, the time is very little, and I have unfortunately chosen a subject that is rather large. It is about a different kind of experience of living, which I first discovered in the city of Cochin. And I have to give a very brief introduction to that study and its content to make my point. I was interested in the psychological biography of a city. And Cochin had a biography of 3,000 years length. You know, it has lasted for 3,000 years. It began as a city of Cranganore, and it is mentioned in Roman documents. Pliny the Junior lamented that Roman wealth and Roman gold was being wasted on useless thing like black pepper. So Cochin has a long history. I entered it very late, and just to get a flavor of the city, because in its recorded 600 years of history, Cochin has had no serious ethnic or religious violence. It has had skirmishes, it has had bit of fist fights perhaps sometimes, and that's about all one could decipher from the police records. So I was very curious as a student of the subjective life of Cochin, what held it together. Cochin is a city which is inhabited by officially 14 communities, but there were actually, when I studied them, there were something like 17 or 18 communities. It was a city where also many of the pamphlets for BHP were printed. Cochin has a printing tradition. And these are very violent, bloodthirsty pamphlets. But they are for export and sell elsewhere. Not in Cochin, nobody buys them, nobody knows about them also. Now, I usually study this kind of issues through life histories and interview people for days. When I started my interviewing, I talk very little in my interviews. I just say something like, I want to know something about your life and why there is no violence in Cochin. You take your time. At the beginning, people came out with absolutely predictable and easy answers. Why is there no violence in Cochin? Because we are all secular here. Why there is no violence in Cochin? Because we are all educated. Even women have 100% literacy. The only touch of life or emotions I found was when some of them said, a very small number, that we have no violence because we are not like North Indians. or we are not violent because we are like the Hindi walas. Very few people said that. And then they often went into long descriptions of their relationship with the other communities and so on and so forth. But by the end of the third or fourth interviews, I gradually came to recognize that the persons I was interviewing all considered their communities to be the best in Cochin, and they disliked most of the other communities and gave very long reasons why they disliked them, why they were inferior, why they're often ungrateful, and so on and so forth. Cochin's communal and ethnic amity, alas, was based on mutual dislike. But I gradually also found out that there were 2 or 3 things which were common in the respondents. First, they could not define themselves without the other communities. To describe Cochin, describe their own families, or describe themselves, their life cycles, they could not but continuously invoke the other communities and what they have done with them, what they have not done with them, why others have sometimes helped them or sometimes they have helped others, and so on and so forth. Their world was peopled by the others. This was not beautifully captured in the words of the mayor of Cochin then, who was describing the emigration of the 2 Jewish communities in Cochin. The third one has already immigrated almost fully to Israel this time. He said, yes, I know, and people of Cochin know, that the life of the Jewish communities will be much better in Israel, because all the Jewish communities are not very rich. One Jewish community was very rich. The rest were not that rich, or well-to-do even. But it is like a daughter who has married well. We know they will have a good life, but a gap in our heart will remain unfilled. And it was very surprising that I could find no Kochini family in Israel, and I interviewed them in Israel too, who on festivities or special days, on death, birth, marriage, and special events like getting a new job and so on, did not have celebrations in Cochin. They came back with the entire family to Cochin have their celebrations. So there was something in that. That's one point. Secondly, I found out that the nature of enmity was very different when they disliked. It was a kind of enmity where the enemies, who is your enemy and why, is an important constituent of your self-definition. And whom you do not like, his stature, his standing in society mattered in your life too, because you had great enemies. It's a bit like the Mahabharata case. You know, the great enmities are remembered and great enmities are celebrated. Three, I found that not only they could not define their lives without the others, that the others were introjected as a kind of an anti-self which represented both temptations and possibilities. The community closest to the two Jewish communities I looked at were the Muslims. And the relationship between Jews and Muslims were accidentally and exceptionally quite good. And they were the closest neighbors usually to the Jews. And the relationship was so good that the Israeli president in one of his lectures over television once said that I request all Israeli citizens to learn from the Indian Jewish emigres how to live with Muslims in Israel. So that was the third. And finally, there was something which I called it later on something to do with the epic culture. That as in Indian epics, the gods are not all perfect. They are very human, with their own jealousies, insecurities, loves and hates. And the demons are also not all evil. They could be like Ravana in Ramayana, Vedagya Brahm. And this relationship was often intertwined between many of the communities with this kind of a peculiar concept of temptations and resistance to it, and possibilities which that other communities self could open up for you. This is the place from where I started. And what I will do in the rest of my presentation is to give two small instances of this, how it survives. These are both from a study which we have not yet published on the 1947 violence, 46-47 violence, the great killings of partition, and our experience of that. Partition violence, as you know, killed officially about 1 million. Unofficially, everybody recognizes because that perhaps the score was closer to 2 million, because many of the elders died after coming immediately up to the country of their destination, the refugees. Many of the children died. 2 epidemics had broken out in the north, in Punjab, and 1 epidemic had taken place in East Bengal when refugees were running away from there. And nobody kept an account of the casualties from that kind of death. But there are also certain strange contradictions. It generated immense violence, immense venom, and memories have been colored by them even now. Behind every negotiations between India, Pakistan and Bangladesh, there is always the ghost of partition there present as an unseen, uninvited guest. Behind every negotiations, the memory of partition is always there amongst the negotiators. 3 generations have not made much difference to that part of the story. But yet the fact remains that in the few studies available to us, we know that there is a consistent picture that the refugees have said their most memorable years, their fondest memories of their childhood in the place where they began life. If they are Pakistanis, they have mentioned India. If they are now Indians, they mentioned the Rias in Pakistan. And it is interesting that how some of them has handled their bitterness to some extent. I guess that two or three instances I will give, given the time available to me, would perhaps give you a clue to that. First, let me give the example of a Hindu refugee from Bangladesh to India, at that time East Pakistan. His father was dead already when the violence took place, but he had a Muslim friend whose father was alive, and he was the friend of his dead father, the Hindu boy's dead father. So he insisted that before he went over to India, he must visit his village home once. The Muslim family was prosperous, landowning owners. The Hindu family was more modest, middle-class family. So ultimately this boy was persuaded to go to the village home of the Muslim boy for 2 or 3 days before coming over to West Bengal. And his Muslim friend's father was very hospitable and very nice, perfectly aware of the limitations or relationship that were set, if you like to say, on touchability and untouchability, ideas of purity and impurity. So he told this Hindu boy that as long as you are here, you don't have to worry. I have already appointed a Hindu cook from amongst the Hindus to come and cook for you in our guest house. And you can, I have also told one of the servants to come to you every morning, take a list of things he should buy from the market for being cooked. And because his father then said that he had to go to the city for a few days, so left him with his son and his wife. The two young friends didn't much care for these principles of purity and pollution and touchability and untouchability. So they persuaded the Muslim boy's mother to cook for them. He said, I don't have to eat separately from you. There's no problem. And in any case, your father is away in the city, so I shall eat with you what your mother cooks for you. Unfortunately, while they were eating, one day, the father prematurely came back from the city and saw them eating. He was furious. He started scolding his son that you have destroyed my trust, you have betrayed me. How will I show my face to when I die to this boy's father that I will have to tell him that, admit that my son has ruined his caste. And he was absolutely furious. He was about to beat up his own son. And he was not only satisfied with that, he did not eat the whole day. And in the evening went to the local peer to ask for a solution to the problem, moral lapse he has committed. That because at his home, this young Hindu has lost his caste by eating with the Muslim family. The peer obviously gave him some solution, because then he went for a pilgrimage to some other place and so on and so forth. That's not. Now I want to place this story in the context of works like that of Satish Sabharwal, who has written an entire book saying that partition can be traced to Hindu caste system. And indeed, some of the Hindus and Sikhs have told us that the caste system in Punjab and Bengal was also responsible for the division of the country, because the Muslim community was never a part of your world and you were not a part of the Muslim community. My second instance is that of a family, a woman who had lost half her family in the violence of 1946-47. Yet she remembered his childhood days and her Muslim friends all the while, almost obsessively. She had even requested her son-in-law, a pilot in the Indian Air Force, when the 1965 war took place, not to go and bomb Lahore, because that was our hometown. I do not know whether son-in-law he did her request, but she talked with much fondness of her childhood friends. And she talked of also this problem of touching and not touching, purity and impurity. She said whenever she went to the Muslim friend's place, this was encouraged. She had a lot of Muslim friends, but one particular family and one particular friend was very close to her, and she used to go to their place. And sometimes she used to eat at that place. But whenever she ate their place, her mother would beat her up, make her take a shower after that, take a bath after that. But there was no objection if she went and only played. So one day, she posed this problem to her Muslim friend's mother. She was a devout Muslim, and the respondent's family also was a devout Hindu, by the way, which is obvious. So her friend's mother said, very strange. Yes, she said, I'm not, my problem is this, that I can eat at my place, but I like the food you cook in your house more than the food in my house. That's my problem. So what do I do? But I get beaten up for eating it. So my mother asked her, do you know any Hindu mantra, chant? Now this was for an Arya Samaji family. She knew Gayatri mantra, which women are not supposed to otherwise know, but she knew. She said, yes, I do. So the Muslim friend's mother said, then it is no problem. I will teach you a Quranic couplet, which when you come from your house to my house, you must recite consistently throughout. So by the time you reach our house, you will become a Muslim. So you can eat anything you like. And on the way back, you recite your mantra all the way through. By the time you go home, you will be a Hindu. And don't have to bother about it at all. But don't have to share this knowledge with your family. Now, I give both the examples to suggest to you. This is a very long paper. Unfortunately, I presented it very briefly. And I've taken out the more meaty parts of it. If you look at it carefully, both these instances, you will see there is in them a different way in which neighborliness is defined, a different way in which differences are taken care of. And this is not possible in forms of cosmopolitanism, where the Enlightenment values dominate, where relationships are defined more in terms of your direct participation and observable behavior, and has little space for intimacy and a different kind of binding, because different kind of enmity, where differences are there, and these are radical differences. But even these radical diversities cannot take away the close bonding. I will end this story with a very brief story about, I call this an epic culture. Now I also call it Silk Route Cosmopolitanism, because I have feeling, because I have now found other evidences that some kind of relationship existed, even in very diverse group, even when a common language is not often available to converse. And this is a story from Yakshagana, the Karnataka, from the Karnataka Ramayana, and it is a part of a Yakshagana play. This is the story of Ram trying to recover Sita from Ravana, and the building of the bridge to Sri Lanka by the Banarasana, the monkey brigade of Ram. After the bridge was built, the people involved came to Ram and said, the bridge has been built, but we have not done a ritual sthapna of that. We have not done a yajna to ensure its longevity. And we are going to fight a war with Ravana. And this is a very formidable enemy. So we have to have a yajna. But in the whole region, there was no Brahmin except one, Ravana himself. Because Ravana was the demon king, he was a lapsed Brahmin, a Brahma Rakshasa, who was also Vedagya, he knew the Vedas. So they decided ultimately, after much deliberation, that they will write to Ravana that he should come and do the yajna. If necessary, in disguise. But the disguise, everybody knew, wouldn't work. Because there was only one Brahmin in the region, and they have given an invitation to Ravana. As it happened, Ravana also could be, apart from a very righteous king, he also was a Brahmin, whose obligation was to do a yajna when invited to do so. So he took a disguise, went and performed the yajna. Nobody touched him, and he came back intact, untouched, knowing fully well that he has ensured the longevity and safety of a bridge which will mean not only the end of Sri Lankan kingdom, but also being the end of his own family. Bad. I can give many such instances. The relationship between Karna and Arjuna are well known in Mahabharata. I propose to you that outside the domain, outside the span of the enlightened values, outside the span of our conventional ideas of closeness and difference, separation, outside the reach of psychological measures of racism and ethnic hostility and animosity, because I was brought up on Bogart's social justice scale, where the best indicator of intimacy was whether you will allow your daughter to marry into the other, or whatever. And one of the bigger indicators was this, you could grade it. Bigger indicator was this, that whether you will allow with a black man to come and eat at your place. Would you go to a black American's place if invited for dinner? And even then it has struck me very strange, because in India there are many communities, Bihar is one of them, where you do not eat at your daughter's place after she is married. Because and if you pay, you have a symbolic payment. The things are more complicated than a unilinear measure of that kind. But anyway, that's not my point, that's a minor point. My point is this, basically, ultimately, that this kind of intimacy is a different kind of intimacy, different kind of enmity. It is not an accident. I would also suggest to you that this is not something typical. I'm not only talking of something typically Indian. That's the organization which saved the largest number of Jews from Nazi gas chambers was set up by an East European Polish, I think it was Polish woman. When I read the account of it, I found out that that woman was very anti-Semitic, anti-Jewish. But there are also different kind of principles come into play in different situations. She was the most courageous savior of the Jews in Europe, the whole of Europe. I say put it, I think the organization's name was Zakota. Anyway, so that's that. I'm sorry that Prime Minister's presentation has been so, how should I put it, scrappy, but unfortunately that's the best I could do in the short time available to me.
No, it wasn't scrappy at all, and this is a completely new vein you've opened. And you're a prolific thinker and writer. He's published widely. What can I say? He's written more books than I've read, and I do agree with him on a number of issues. But on the question of Ravan and the symbolism of that, I'd like to ask you a question. Ask you what you think is the difference between ethics and morality and public and private and citizenship. Because what you talked about was an area which is outside the realm of citizenship. And if you were to take in citizenship, wouldn't your digits change quite radically? But you don't have to answer it right now. We will take some questions, and at some point we could probably take into account. Yeah, your name, please.
Jeff from Bath University in the UK.
Sorry?
Jeff Wood from the Bath University in the UK. I love this kind of material. This is what I really thrive on. So thank you very much for your insights. Isaiah Berlin argued that humans have a capacity for incommensurate behavior, which is partly what you've been referring to. But what's interesting or needs to be unraveled, and I want to try and get to that from you, sir, is whether that incommensurate behavior is simply contradictory and unable to be explained, or whether the incommensurate behavior is rational and in some sense strategic amongst the actors that you're talking about.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's fair.
Over there. Please introduce yourself.
I'm Dinesh Mishra from Jamshedpur, and I just wanted to complete the story that Nandi Sahab told. Well, Ravana did perform the yajna of Ramchandra. The extension is that Ravan very well knew that the yajna cannot be performed for a grihast or a married person without his wife. Ravan had also brought Sita with him to perform the yajna and then went back both. Thank you.
Chapter 1, Section 2. Siddharth? Siddharth.
I wonder if, Professor Nandy, one has similar stories or tales of this kind of accommodation or intimacy within Hindus cutting across caste. In other words, I've heard many of these kinds of stories in the Hindu-Muslim context, although admittedly it's more Muslims going out of the way to accommodate Hindus, but that may just be the stories I've heard. But very rare to come across this kind of dynamism, at least I've not encountered anecdotes even, of upper caste generosity towards Dalits in this way, or accommodating. And if my understanding is correct, and that these are very rare, how does that affect the fundamental proposition that you're making?
Isaiah Berlin was invoked. The point that Ashish, you may have to ponder about Isaiah Berlin, if you want to answer the question that was asked, is that Isaiah Berlin didn't argue that we could live with our incommensurabilities or paradoxes / contradictions only in medieval times or pre-modern times. Even in the post-Enlightenment times, he argued nothing straight could be made out of the crooked timber of humanity. So even in modern times, we live with incommensurables, and it's not simply a feature of pre-Enlightenment period.
I think it's time, close it for now and answer a few questions.
I do not have any pretensions that this is directly relevant to the idea of citizenship. We have to keep the two domains separately. This does not obviate the need for enlightened intervention in the public domain. But I am also aware of something called clinical gaze. I come from that background. And that imposes on us a different kind of responsibility, that you do not use reason to decide a patient's life, because you know as a doctor that the patient cannot survive. And the resources of the hospital and the society, it will be wasted if you use it on the patient. You just terminate his life and move on to those who are healthier, who have a better chance of survival. It is your job to find out what are the minimum resources of are still available in the physique of your patient, and try to build on it. It is your job to fight the temptation to terminate life. It is your job to fight for the health of the patient, even when you know the chances are minimal for his survival. Only reason is not enough. There is also hypocritical oath. Now, I propose to you that we have not explored that part of the story. I have now hundreds of such stories. I have stories when a Pakistani friend of mine have collected 100 instances of refugees from India to Pakistan who have said that we have survived because of what their Hindu friends did. He began his work when he went to a friend's place and found that the head of the family, a woman whose husband was killed in the Partition violence, that she was an abducted woman, abducted by a young Sikh man who took her and whose friends have stolen other Muslim girls. And they went, and he went home with this girl whom he had abducted, and his old father said, "We are Sikhs. This is not permitted in our religion. But all his friends are after Muslim women. The son didn't listen to her. Listen to his father. He refused to return the woman. The father took out the ceremonial sword from the mantelpiece of the house and killed his son and took this woman back to her own family. When he heard this story, he decided to study more. This is Salim Ahmed, a trade union leader in Pakistan. He is not a very trained, he is not a clinically trained psychologist or anything of that kind. He just was moved enough and by this instance to begin a long study on this, and it took out. Now you might say that 100 means nothing because you are choosing them. It is not representative of the overall picture. But I might also tell you that though our sample was also dependent on the survivors, we had studied something like, contacted something like 1,500 people, 1,350 of them were more usable data, more or less usable, not for all purposes, because many of them were very old, many of the persons' memory was failing, and so on and so forth. But nonetheless, 40% of them said, these are mostly people fleeing Pakistan and coming to India, that mostly 40% of them said either they are directly benefited from their Muslim friends or neighbors or unknown Muslim persons, or alternatively knew of others who had received similar help. This is the number. That I cannot say. We have not done that analysis as yet, but I can perhaps say something about it in a year and a half to you, give you some clues to it. But most of them, frankly speaking, will be all kind of, very difficult to distinguish and so on and so forth. But nonetheless, we'll give you some data probably later on. The point I'm trying to make you is this, that if you can find any other genocide or mass violence anywhere in the world in recorded history where you have a figure of 40% of that kind, please do tell me. I will be very surprised if you can find any, even in other cases it reaches even 4%. And these are actually victims. Many cases very bitter about it. Many people try to deny that because in their bitterness they have joined formations which are anti-Muslim, the RSS or PHP or Jalsa. They're very, BJP, they're very bitter. And they say, what is the good of saving me? They couldn't save my uncle or they couldn't save my father, So I don't, that also is there. I'm not denying that. But nonetheless, it is a fact. Yes, there is a difference between ethics and morality. And I'm quite aware that there are two different propositions. The Sikh father who killed his own son to save the woman was operating on the basis of very conventional morality, not ethics. But nonetheless, there is also something else, even in this conventional morality, which comes very close to ethics. Because it is no accident that of the 1 million women who were abducted in partition, on that at least we have data, a huge majority of them, not all, a huge majority of them were after abduction and rape, they were married by their abductors. If you can compare it with the much smaller number of women who were raped in the Gujarat riots, virtually all victims of rape were burnt with death because they were advised, one of them told, to not leave any living witness. That's the difference between that violence and this violence. The country has changed. Both the countries have changed. I have no illusion about it, but some possibilities are still opened up by that other experience too. That's that.
Thank you very much. You mentioned that you would like some information, and I think it would be worth our while to think of what happened in the Second World War, and that according to Grayling, and some of you may have heard of AC Grayling, about 19%, if not more, of those in the concentration camps were not Jews, not gays, not gypsies, but quote-unquote regular Germans. And that will tell you how many people in Germany actually opposed Hitler who were Germans and were not able to finally see it through, but that's a different matter.
We have not looked for them.
Yeah.
We have not looked for them.
Thank you very much. I mean, apropos what you said, I'm reminded of this point that Salman Rushdie made, that the best way one can measure cosmopolitanism is when you can't determine who your neighbor is going to be, to which I've added a rider. The best measure of cosmopolitanism is one when you cannot determine who our son-in-law is going to be. Well, thank you very much.